Most people think the hardest thing about surplus funds or excess proceeds is finding the money. It's not. That's one of the easiest parts. The hardest part is when you find the money. That's when the case begins. You start working the file, and then sometimes you discover that the owner is deceased. Because the second that happens, this is no longer a normal surplus funds case. Everything changes. Now it's just not about a lead. It's about who has authority, the documentation, and it's about figuring out who can actually step up and claim these funds on behalf of the deceased claimant and their estate. In this video, I'm breaking down a real deceased owner surplus funds case that we took all the way to the finish line. I'm going to show you what the file looked like, what changed the second that we found out the owner was deceased, mistakes that could have killed the case, and the exact path we took to move it forward to recovery. Quick note before we get into anything, I'm keeping the names and the identity of the people involved with the claim, all their details private. But the process is 100% real. And this is educational, not legal advice. Again, remember, depending on what state you're working in, the rules may vary, even by county to county inside that state, especially when probate, small estate affidavits, or heirship matters. So here's what this case looked like. I'm not going to say the exact state, but for the example, let's just call this a Maryland state case. At first glance, it looked clean. The money was there, there was a property trail, we knew who the direct owners were, and everything looked reachable. Then once we started digging deeper and trying to identify the right party, we found that the owner had already passed away. And the moment that happened, the file changed. Because now the question was no longer, who can we reach? Now the question was, who actually has the legal standing to claim these funds? Now this is exactly where most people blow these cases. They find the first relative or sibling that they can get on the phone with, and they listen to their family story, and they assume that this person is the claimant based on what they heard from them, not on the actual paper trail or documentation. In a deceased owner file, the relative you find first does not automatically grant that to be the right person to collect these funds. The person who talks first is not always the correct person. I don't care what they tell you, and they're going to want to get this money. The closest relative is not always the correct claimant. And the most motivated or loudest person is not always the person who can move the file. That's why the first thing we stopped doing is treating it like a normal surplus funds or excess proceeds case. The first thing we looked for was the paper trail. We want to know exactly how the ownership sat. Was the property in a descendant's name? Was it a trust? Was it a business entity? Is there already some probate matters filed somewhere? This all matters because this creates different claimant paths depending on the outcome. So before we got emotionally attached to any person we made contact with, we got clear on the structure first itself. In this case, the ownership path told us that there was no probate opened, that the deceased owner did not have a will, trust, and it was in their personal name. This was the first major turning point in the file because now we knew exactly what direction to go in. We know it wasn't a business, we know it wasn't a trust, we know there was no will, and we know there was no probate opened. So we went with interstate succession. Now in this file, the real challenge was the owner was deceased, and because there was no probate or no will, we went with interstate succession laws. Also, the person who was in line to collect those funds also was deceased. Now these people lived together in this home, and what happened was they died during COVID. This is why it wasn't listed in the documentation. We had to do this on our own digging with our own private investigation. They both passed away inside the home during COVID. They were caretakers to the daughter's son, who was then left in the house with no one to take care of him for weeks. A neighbor actually came over because they noticed a light on at an odd time and found the child, who was not a child, who was an adult who was incapacitated mentally and had private care, was all alone with the two mother and grandmother, who was the owner, left in the house. So we were dealing with interstate succession. The first heir was also deceased. So we needed to go to the second possible person, which was the son of the child. And we needed to make sure that there was no other siblings or spouse connected before moving forward. And again, this child, who was a grown adult, was under permanent care. And because his two caregivers passed away, the state took him to a state care facility. And after he left and the two people, his mother and grandmother, passed away, there was no one left in the family to take care of this property. No one paid the property taxes, and it eventually was seized by the state. After it was sold at foreclosure, it sold for more than the debt that was owed on the property, and it generated these surplus funds that had been sitting in the state for almost 3 years, and no one was there to help this individual, the grandson, even know about the money or attempt to collect these funds. This is the part that kills a lot of these deals, because the filing starts turning into a family history, family politics, and half-true stories. One person says this, another person says this. You have to go based off the documentation and the letter of the law. So it's very important to understand the local requirements needed to get through these cases and files. That's why we have to stay disciplined and we don't take any shortcuts. We just keep asking the same question. Who can actually prove the right to act? Just like any other case, once we get to a certain point, we built the documentation stack. For files like this, it usually means some variations of the death certificate, ownership records like a title or deed, probate filings if any exist, not in this case, letters if they've been issued, not in this case, trust paperwork if it's involved, again, this was not a trust deal, and the family linked documents that connect the claimant to the descendants. In this case, the document that mattered the most was the title and the deed. Because there was no will, trust, or business involved, we went with interstate succession, which led us to the grandchild who was the only heir left to claim these funds. But like I said, he was in state care. We had no way to find out where he was, and that's where our private investigation of our own skill set starts to take place. We had to decide whether this was a file that we could continue going forward with. We had been working on it for a while, and we weren't making any headway. We finally got some information that led us to a care facility. We were able to reach the manager of that facility, explain the situation, inform him about his patient's situation and all the money that was at risk for him to get or lose. He luckily listened to us, allowed our attorney to meet with this gentleman in person and explain the situation. We got him signed up. We got the case filed in time before the state tried to absorb the funds, and we're able to start this on the right path for him and eventually get the money back. And that's an important lesson here in this business. Just because the money's there does not mean the right path is obvious. You have to get creative in most of these cases and be able to learn on the fly. Some simplified affidavit situations do exist, but they're limited and they're state specific. And some institutions or holders still insist on formal authority documents. But in this case's situation, there was no probate involved, no will. We went directly to the heir that was closest in the interstate succession. We got him informed, educated. We offered our services. We got him filed with the state, and we got recovered over $225,000 to this individual who had no idea about the money and was weeks or months away from losing it to the state forever without any chance of getting it back once it's past achievement. Now, here's the part people don't talk about a lot. Trust. When money comes up after someone passes away, emotions get strong. People get suspicious, they get defensive, people worry they're being tricked, and sometimes they don't even trust one another. So part of working a file like this is not just finding the right person or the right legal path. It's presenting the process clearly so that the right person or family member feels safe moving forward with you. That means no hype, no fake urgency, no sounding like a scammer, just clarity, professionalism, and receipts. In this case, the breakthrough happened when we were able to reach the care facility and talk to the manager and schedule a time to get in front of this individual. But still, we had to get in front, explain the process, have them trust us, and feel good about moving forward. Just because you found them, you talked to them, nothing means anything until paperwork is signed and we have the case filed. But once this happened, there was no more confusion in the file and we were ready to work. He gave us the authority to act on his behalf, and we filed with the state, did all the work with the county and the courts, and we made sure this got filed in a safe and timely manner, and we got this $225,000 back in the hands where it actually belonged to. And the reason why I wanted to show this case is simple. This is what separates the real operators from the people who just chase names on the list. Anybody can find a deceased owner file. Not everybody knows how to work it. So the lesson from this case is simple. First, once the owner is deceased, stop treating this case like a normal file. Second, do not confuse the first relative you speak with for the correct claimant. Third, figure out the ownership bucket early. Personal name, trust, corp, LLC, multiple owners. Once you have that, you have the right direction. Fourth, let the documents drive the file itself. And fifth, when the authority issue is messy, don't force the clarity. Solve the authority problem. This is how the money gets unlocked. Not by chasing harder and not by seeing the file correctly. And that's why deceased owner cases and surplus funds or excess proceeds can be some of the most profitable cases that you'll see, because most people never get past the confusion stage. And that is your moat. Comment surplus if you want more breakdowns like this.